Welcome to Meaningful Activities to Generate Interesting Classrooms, Section 4, Part 2, Positioning Activities, Informational, Introduction, Conference Call. We continue our discussion as to how to purposefully position the activities we use in a lesson so that they have the greatest impact. In this section, we are going to focus on informational activities. Please locate page 85, section 4, part 2, Positioning Activities, Informational. Note the quotations on this page. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. This quote reminds me of the sieve race. A sieve, a drainer or colander, is often used to drain the water from a pot of cooked pasta. There is a picnic race that requires the runners to carry water from one end to the other. They had to scoop water into a sieve from a large bucket at one end, hold the sieve over their heads, and run to the other end, where they had to pour the water into a small bucket and fill it before the other teams did. Participants soon discovered that this was a challenging task because no matter how fast they ran, the water would either run out or splash out, and very little water was transferred at the other end. It may have been refreshing on a hot summer day, but nonetheless frustrating and unsuccessful. This race is a metaphor for this quotation and what is going on in our classrooms, where there is always a race to educate our students. Are we teaching our students with the same approach as the sieve race? Are we trying to fill the pail of our students' brains only to have it escape like water from a sieve? As a teacher, we must use instructional approaches that light a fire in our students to learn. We want to stimulate their curiosity and inspire them to learn, not just fill the pail. The second quotation reads, "You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain." This too speaks to how we present curriculum to our students. Do we only use lecture to present information to our students, or are there other paths just as effective? That's what we will address in this section, informational activities that provide more than one pathway to learning. As we move into activities that are more complex in nature, it presents other challenges that we have to manage. How do I find ideas for activities? And how do I find supplies and materials that support these activities? Please locate page 86, Resources for Developing Meaningful Activities. Note the quotation on the top of the page by Mark McCormack, who was a writer and chairman of the International Management Group. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, just attach it to a new wagon. With the vast amount of resources at our fingertips, we don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to activities. We can draw on the resources we have readily available. The information on pages 86 and 87 addresses three important topics: ready-to-go activities, using easy-to-find materials and supplies, and using students as a resource. Please go to Canvas, Modules, Section 4, Part 2, Resources for Developing Meaningful Activities to find the revised activity directions. You will work in small groups for this activity. Read, highlight, and discuss the information about these three topics, one at a time. Using the editable Google Doc assigned to your group, complete the T-chart like the one you see illustrated on page 87. When your group discusses ready-to-go activities, list resources and websites on the T-chart you use to find activities that are already created and ready to go, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. For example, Pinterest. When your group discusses using easy-to-find materials and supplies, list the resources you use for supplies and materials and how you use them. For example, some teachers use macaroni for commas and quotation marks, and red hots for periods, when they have their students punctuate sentences. This makes punctuation both hands-on and three-dimensional. When your group discusses using students as a resource, list ways in which you use students to develop activities or create activity materials. For example, rather than lecturing about a scene in a novel, you might have your students reenact the scene. As each group shares its ideas, find a place where you can make a comprehensive list of ideas that are relevant to you. What resources for ready-to-go activities did you list? Could you visit Pinterest, Edutopia, We Are Teachers, Teach Hub, Education World, New York Learns, Junior Achievement, local art museums, science centers, botanical gardens, zoos, and history museums for kits on various topics, teacher conferences and workshops, homeschool websites, gifted student websites? Could you play board games or TV show games, exchange ideas with colleagues at the same grade level, purchase books of activities sold on Amazon? What easy-to-find materials and supplies did you list, and how do you use them? Could you visit yard sales, thrift stores, craft stores? Could you use recycled items such as cereal boxes, paper towel rolls, wrapping paper and wallpaper scraps, egg cartons, ribbon, gallon jugs, coffee containers, etc.? Magazines and mailers, back-to-school sales to stock up on supplies, free return labels. What ways do you use students as a resource? Could students create practice or review games for the class, create an informational display on a topic, create a brochure that provides information on a curricular topic, create sets of flashcards for one another, create mysteries or logic puzzles for one another, provide quotations, questions, or current event issues for class discussion, create peer teaching materials? Remember, as educators, time is of the essence, so providing ready-to-go activities and materials makes it easier for you to provide meaningful activity-based learning. When you involve students, you foster ownership in the learning process. Ideas, supplies, and materials should not block you. Be resourceful, use what is readily available, and don't reinvent the wheel. We have discussed previously the importance of student-centered active learning instead of teacher-centered passive learning. As we discuss informational activities in this section, we want to look at ways in which teachers can impart information in ways other than lecture. Please locate page 88, Informational Activities, Multiple Pathways to Learning. In every teaching situation, teachers have a responsibility to impart curriculum information. However, lecture should not be the only tool in an educator's toolbox. Information can be presented in many different ways, and teachers should vary their approach by utilizing multiple means of representation and multimodality instruction. Universal design for learning refers to this research-based strategy as multiple means of representation. When choosing to give lecture bursts, and we must at times, remember that research shows that on the average, students are listening to their teachers only 60% of the time during lectures. Passive learning of this type can lead to motivational and classroom behavior problems. Research shows that lecture bursts should last no more than the chronological age of your students, plus 2 minutes. If we want to keep students motivated and engaged, we must represent information using a variety of techniques. Multimodality instruction and teaching using more than one pathway is highly effective. So adding visuals to your lecture, asking students to highlight or complete a graphic organizer, providing time to pause, discuss, reflect, and think, or utilizing movement and hands-on activities to provide multiple means of representation are required for depth of learning. Next, you will experience a number of activities that impart information using multiple means of representation. We have discussed previously the importance of student-centered active learning instead of teacher-centered passive learning. As we discuss informational activities in this section, we want to look at ways in which teachers can impart information in ways other than lecture. The first example we will examine to demonstrate multiple means of representation is discovery learning. Please locate page 89, Discovery Learning, and read the introductory information on this page, highlighting points you find important and relevant. Note the quotation at the top of the page by poet Arthur Guterman. He who learns by finding out has sevenfold the skill of he who learns by being told. On the bottom of page 89, locate activity, find the finish, defeat of the Spanish Armada. Please also go to Canvas, Modules, Section 4, Part 2, Find the Finish, where you will find the directions for this activity. Work as a group to find the finish as to how Sir Francis Drake defeated the mighty Spanish Armada in 1588. Reference the map and highlight the information on pages 90 and 91, or the corresponding items to print page, as I provide background information and set up the battle positions. There are 3 clue documents you can reference at any time during your deliberations for additional information. Please do not use your electronic devices to search for the answer to find the finish. Use your group's editable Google Doc to illustrate and explain your group's prediction of how Sir Francis Drake defeated the Spanish Armada. Please locate pages 90 and 91, Defeat of the Spanish Armada background information on the corresponding items to print page. I am going to set up the scenario of the defeat of the Spanish Armada up to a point by presenting the information you see on this page and the next, while referencing the map. As I present the information, you can follow along, highlight important facts, and make notes on the map as you see fit. Then you can reference this information later during your deliberations. Please follow along and highlight important points on pages 90 and 91. In 1588, Sir Francis Drake was asked by the Queen of England to set up a defense against the mighty Spanish Armada, which was made up of 131 ships. The Spanish had decided to invade England because English pirates, such as Sir Francis Drake, were robbing their ports in the New World and their galleons. Spaniards such as Pizarro were hauling a great deal of gold and silver from the New World to Spain, and Spain was becoming more and more wealthy. The Spanish were also afraid the English were going to colonize North America, and this would cut into their gold accumulation. The Spanish, tired of being robbed, decided to move the English threat once and for all time. Neither Drake nor anyone else in England knew where the Spanish invaders would strike. Would it be at Plymouth, which was where Sir Francis Drake was at the time? As it advanced across the horizon, into the mouth of the English Channel, the Armada was a sight to behold, with the sun gleaming on its golden sails. Brightly colored banners and flags flew. The decks of the galleons bristled with guns. The mighty armada, a vast spectacle, sailed forward with stately grace to deal at last with England. The English were able to obtain only small ships, called privateers, to defend themselves against the armada. Privateers were privately owned warships commissioned by England to fight or harass enemy ships. In this case, they were used primarily to rob Spanish gold ships. The privateers sailed out of Plymouth with the strong winds blowing down the channel, escaping south before the armada arrived. The giant armada dominated the channel. The large galleons lumbered on, a seemingly unstoppable force for Drake and the English. Let's continue on page 91. The Spanish ships were packed into a tight crescent for mutual protection. Their commander, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, his galleon, a rainbow of flags, occupied a position in the vanguard, with the other men of war strung out along the edge of the crescent. The formation was magnificently kept, as if all the ships were attached together by an invisible thread. Nearing the armada, Drake noticed that half of the vessels were supply ships and troop transports. In addition to these Spanish ships, an invasion force of 17,000 Spanish soldiers was waiting at Dunkirk. The plan was for the armada to rendezvous with the soldiers at Dunkirk, convoy the troops onto English shores across the Channel, and attack London. The English waited because they knew they could neither break up the formation of the armada nor outgun them. All they could do was nip at their heels as they sailed up the Channel. The Spanish ships stopped for the night at Calais, not far from their destination at Dunkirk. They anchored near sandbanks along a dangerous shoreline that was unprotected from the wind and leeward of their boats. As a group, you will now deliberate and discuss your prediction as to how did Sir Francis Drake defeat the Spanish Armada. Imagine you are Sir Francis Drake and that you have been assigned by the king to protect England. You now know the game plan of the Spanish Armada. Your goal is to protect England by coming up with your own strategy to defeat the Spanish Armada and save London. This is a big task, but we know from history one you can accomplish. Your group must illustrate your prediction using copy paper and markers and then explain your strategy to the class. At any time during your deliberations, you may check out the clue links on Canvas. There is room to record the content of each clue box on the bottom of page 91. Your group will have to interpret the meaning of its contents. Remember, please do not use your personal devices to look up how the Spanish were defeated. If you know the history, please limit your participation so others on your team can play. Please return to the Find the Finished discussion area to review other groups' predictions of how the Spanish Armada was defeated. Are any of your solutions potentially viable solutions? Here is the way it actually happened. Drake sacrificed one of his own ships, the Thomas, to defeat the Armada. He set it on fire as an example, followed by the other English captains. 8 English vessels were covered with flammable pitch and stuffed with gunpowder, while loaded guns were left on board, which was clue box 3. Then the English had to wait for the right conditions to set these boats afloat among the tightly packed ships of the Armada. In the middle of a moonlit night, a good wind came up, and the current ran toward the shore where the Spanish fleet was anchored, which was clue box 2. Suddenly the Spaniards saw blazing vessels coming swiftly toward them. As the fire ships came among the fleet, they began exploding and throwing off sparks and burning debris. The Armada panicked. The fleet broke anchor and tried to move, but it was trapped in a narrow part of the channel moving against the current, which made it difficult to sail out. Although no Spanish ships actually caught fire, they collided with each other and some ran aground in the darkness and confusion. By dawn, what was left of the Crescent Armada formation had scattered, with many of the ships miles apart. The swifter, more maneuverable English privateers sailed in and out among the Spanish galleons, firing broadside after broadside, which was clue box 1. The Spanish Armada attempted to fire back, but many of their cannonballs hit their own ships. Spanish casualties were great, although the wind changing to the southwest saved the fleet from being entirely destroyed on the Netherlands coast. The Armada had no alternative but to run before the wind. They had to follow the wind northward, along Scotland into the rough and dangerous North Sea, and then down the western side of Ireland, where even more boats were lost. Remnants of some of the Spanish ships have been found since off the western coast of Ireland. By the time the Armada finally returned to Spain, after sailing all the way around the British Isles, including Ireland, less than half of its ships had survived. Meanwhile, the English did not lose a single ship other than those they set afire. The Spanish Armada was ruined, and Spain's domination of the seas was ended. The New World was then safe for English colonization. Please note the following additional information. The English began to regard themselves as a chosen people and went on to conquer lands encompassing the entire globe as they became a dominant world power. As the old saying goes, the sun never sets on the English Empire. Its naval domination lasted until the War of 1812, when the U.S. began to take over its position. If Spain had won, Spain might have dominated the world, and the world would have had a Spanish influence instead of an English one. If that happened, more of the world would speak Spanish today. It stopped Spain from imposing religious unity upon Europe. England stood forth as the successful champion of Protestantism against Catholicism. This gave courage to the Protestant cause, allowing it to flourish and spread. Please locate page 92, Classroom Connections. In this activity, we have taken information that we would normally cover in our curriculum, and instead of presenting the information in a lecture format, we presented it in a more engaging Find the Finish format. What topic in your curriculum could you use for discovery learning or a Find the Finish activity? Could you pause a movie, novel, or video at a crucial decision-making point and ask students to predict what happens next or write an ending? Could you pause historical events or current events that haven't concluded yet and ask students to predict what happens? Could you set up an experiment in math or science and ask students to predict what the outcome or result might be? Could you provide statistics about climate change or animal extinction and ask students to predict what might happen at different time intervals in the future? Could you show an unfamiliar historical object and ask students to guess what it is and how it was used? Could you show a scene with historical or sequencing errors and ask students to find the misinformation? What made discovery learning and find the finish either challenging or engaging for you? If history is not usually your favorite, did this activity make history interesting? Did you want to know how it ended? Did history come to life? Did you like the group discussion and interaction? Did you practice a lot of collaboration skills, as well as critical thinking and creative thinking skills to come up with the answer? Did you really have to dig deep into the content in order to come up with a viable solution? Did you have to know and understand details of the event? If you are a science teacher, were you able to contribute your knowledge about wind direction and ocean currents? Did you have to know that a northeast wind blows from the northeast rather than toward the northeast? Please take a moment to review the activity assets to debrief this activity. Remember, this activity is a perfect example of how teachers can deliver curriculum content, utilizing multiple pathways to learning. This activity engaged the brain and required both critical and creative thinking. Which pathways to learning do you need to add to your curriculum, presentations, and lectures? Think of ways in which you can make learning come alive. The rest of this session will be for you to work independently through the material. There will now be narrated PowerPoints on Canvas, Modules Section 4, Part 2, to walk you through the rest of today's activities. Please be sure to post the activities in the discussion area or submitted assignment area before our next class. Remember, even though these activities are not graded, they must be completed to report your successful completion to your university partner. Immediately after the conference call, you will go to Canvas, Modules, Section 4, Part 2, Positioning Activities Informational, to learn about the best resources for developing meaningful activities. Your next video reflects on simulations. Be prepared to mine for chocolate chips. The third video focuses on cooperative learning. We hope you enjoy your 13 colonies display. Remember to keep your identity a secret. The fourth video helps us reflect on classroom reflection and connections to the course content. Finally, we will review future preparations, including assessments 1 and 7. Let the good times begin. If you have any questions while you work, please call or email your instructor. This concludes Section 4, Part 2, Introduction Conference Call. Please continue to Modules Section 4, Part 2, Positioning Activities Informational, Mining Simulation.